Эх-хе-хей! Ах, понеслась! Иной раз я выйду в поле, подойду к пруду, что с краю, соберу зверья с собою, так я лихо отдыхаю, чтобы было веселее. Нам и днем, и даже ночью мы запустим open air.
So I'll start with the title. Title is Where the Wild Things Go. And usually wildness or wilderness, the term itself evokes civilized meaning from the beginning. So our relationship to wildness and to each other is structured by the meaning of civilization. And so I'll start with these terms. I'll just break down the terms themselves. So how do we relate to wildness? What do we understand? Usually, people think, well, it's the wild forest, where wild things are. And what are wild things? It's the things that are either scary, either to be curbed and separated from the civilized spaces. It's things we fear, things we dream of, but they're always on our human and humanist terms. Because our whole experience is already transmitted to us through a domesticated language. What does that mean? What is civilization? So civilization is a way of relating to the world through domestication, which means that at a certain point, humans started thinking of the world as existing for them, on their terms, for their benefit, for their economic needs, nutritional needs, pleasure. So wilderness becomes, in our civilized spaces, becomes a space of pleasure for us, with no regard to what is wilderness in itself. And in order to understand how we have come to be domesticated by our knowledge, and by what triggers this understanding, we need to actually go all the way to the birth of life on Earth. Like, where does life come from? What is the basis, the essence of relationships between the first cells, the first bacteria that came billions of years ago? And when we start looking at how life itself happened, so there was an eruption, and Earth started forming matter that was driven by energy. Like, the first source of movement and life is the ability of different cells to interact through energy. So energy is the basis of anything that is moving or non-moving, living or non-living. And what do I mean by that? It's protons, neutrons, the bacteria interacting with each other in a mutualistic way in order to give birth to diversity. And this diversity, when we start following how life started evolving, the diversity was always governed by mutualistic relationships. So at the basis of wilderness is an economics of energy that are governed by how much we give into diversity, and we never, I mean all of us living beings, never look at the others as existing solely for our purpose, for our needs, for our energy supply. Okay? And so, of course, like, you know, our civilized knowledge tells us what? Tells us what, you know. There's wilderness, and the first image comes with wilderness is predators. And that's a narrative. A humanistic, civilized narrative that that justifies and structures predatory economics. Because if we focus on one aspect and legitimate our own practices based, you're welcome to.
Sorry to interrupt, it's just to ask you whether there's a whisper translation available toward French for somebody.
Oh,
If no, you.
Okay, so yeah, so this understanding of predation becomes the focus that justifies our own economics and our own civilized understanding of what we exist for and what the world exists for. And so in this respect, the basis of the very first revolution that happened in the world would be, would anyone guess what revolution?
Maybe agriculture?
It's usually thought of as agriculture, and agricultural revolution did change tremendously, kind of solidified our relationships of the predatory relationships. You know, basically, you know, domesticating crops, grains, domesticating animals, the conceptualization of labor relationships, which is at its basis extraction of energy. It always comes back to our relationships through energy. How do we exchange energy? And in an agricultural civilization, what happened was that now energy was no longer pluralistic. No longer did diverse groups exist, and individuals in those diverse groups exist for their own purpose, for their own pleasure of being. Because when life happened in its magic, it was very mathematically balanced, chaotic, yet always keeping itself alive and flourishing. So with agricultural revolution, it was solidified. But my problem is that when I looked, I examined, you know, so what happened during the agricultural revolution? How did we come? And then the story goes, well, yes, you know, then private property was, the concept of private property became feasible and implemented. So it's always the attitudes, the ideas of relating, the extraction of energy starts getting solidified. Borders, property ownership, ownership of labor, reproduction of labor. So we have gender categories. Rape becomes ingrained in the system itself. Rape of animals because you reproduce, rape of plants because you no longer let them go wild and choose how they want to experiment with their species and where they want to go. You stop diversification, you stop evolution. You control and you consume for one species only. But the idea had to have come from somewhere before. Somewhere before, there must have been a mutation in a group that suddenly saw that the world should not diversify, should not exist for its own pleasure of being, but for consumption. And that I call the predatory revolution. So that happened before. That agricultural revolution was a response to a new idea of relating. And these primate experiments with predation, or mostly scavenging, because actually when we look again at the history of life on Earth, scavenging was the most feasible socio-environmental economics, because you need to recycle, you know, and you need to, what you consume you give back in different forms. Several catastrophes happened, and we don't know, sometimes there were, you know, different assumptions. A meteorite maybe caused one catastrophe, glaciations, you know, different periods. And obviously it changed the dynamics, and certain groups of primates and other species as well started adapting to a current crisis situation that started maybe first scavenging of dead meat and then dead animals, and then started hunting. But at a certain point, usually, and we noticed that with primates, with our cousins, the chimps or others, whenever the forest is being encroached upon, chimps start hunting, they start waging war upon each other. But the minute you start reforesting and giving them the space, they revert to their usual frugivore diet. And with human groups, it was also like maybe a need for a specific period. But there was a point when that revolution happened and that mutations became permanent, that groups started recording, ingraining this new economics and this new attitude to life and to our consumption and extraction of energy in a new predatory way. John Zerzan attributes it to symbolic thought and symbolic language, and we do see that with hunting groups are the first ones, and Marshall Salins talks about it. Well, you know, it's in Anthropology, who starts representing the hunting prey. Representation, cave paintings, cave art becomes important for hunting groups, and for this new economics and new relationship to ourselves, obviously, through food, and to the world around us. Claude Lévi-Strauss talks about art, and actually sees that the more complex the art is, the more there is tension, unsolved tension, differentiation, class differentiation, or gender differentiation in the group. The less complex the art is, the more the society is capable of resolving that conflict within itself, and so there seems to be a relationship to symbolic culture and our economics, our predatory economics. And so, how does it all apply to us today? Especially what interests me is, okay, so we know all the critique of the main culture, and it went too far, and there's slavery, and there's war, and there's, and it never went away. 10,000 of years of agricultural civilization has cemented these relationships. But there has always been tendencies to resist, to rebel, to try to dismantle, and for 10,000 years, we are still here, and the situation seems to be more and more critical. Okay, so where have we gone wrong? This is where symbolic culture, symbolic economics gives us the clue. And we are all ingrained in this system, in this culture. So if we look at the cave paintings, and We take Claude Lévi-Strauss' word that, okay, for his observation that there is more conflict, there is more tension, there's more predatory relationships within the group that that are unresolved with art. What does language mean? What does culture mean? What does anything symbolic? Clothes that we wear are also symbolic of what identity we want to claim to, at least to show, right? How we want to be accepted. How does it work for us to structure our own relationships within an attempt to resist, within a revolutionary movement? So symbolic culture is, okay, so this brings us to education. Education is there to ingrain in its domesticated subjects these relationships and actually unknowledge about ourselves and our world. And symbolic culture helps us to not really see how our own relationship, how our energy is exchanged. Where do we extract our living? And what is our life? What is our life? Apart from food, there's the need to be happy because life flourishes in well-being and feeling of happiness. So we get symbolic culture, a whole traditions, narratives, representation that keeps drumming into us that we are here to work, that we are here to suffer, but at the same time gives us this mythical predator myth that allows us to believe that we are the master. At the same time consuming our lives and consuming our energies and consuming our suffering and promising something in the resolution in the future. And religion is very good at that because it promises it even after death. So, and we try to resist. And what happens when we resist on the terms of this economic culture that is not capable to resolve these conflicts and in fact is meant to reproduce them and to ingrain them and to solidify them. And education is the very first method of alienating us from the real life, from the real mutualistic exchanges with diversity. It gives us this myth of the ultimate predator, and within closed walls, within a system that does not rewards very few, and punishes most of us. You work, otherwise you'll starve. You work, otherwise you die. You will complain, you will be punished. And you don't look nice, you will not get promoted. You will be punished because you will be poor, because you will starve, because you will not have. And so this is the narrative, and this is the system that starts from childhood. And trying to resist a system that puts us in a schizophrenic relationship to ourselves, and schizophrenic, I mean, in the original, well, the etymology of the word phren is mind, and schizo of split. So you're already split from reality. One of the ways in which the narrative subverts resistance is that we understand ourselves as mentally ill when we do not accept punishing relationships. We do not accept predation. And yet, we do not understand how we reproduce it, how we still think through symbolic language, through figures of authority, through narratives of authority. Because this is one of the things, is that if you are not going to know how the world lives, you need to have a narrative that you're going to believe how the world works. And symbolic culture can offer you a lie very easily because it calls things, and then for any notion, like let's say even the most basic, love. Like, what is the concept of love? How do we know the world? So in the wilderness, where everything, moving or not moving, living or not living, exists for its own pleasure, for its own interaction, loves the world by being happy. In our civilized culture, when we say the word love, it is that of consumption. So as we relate to each other, we still relate to each other as I love you because you are giving me pleasure. But within a hierarchical system, that is always going to be predatory. It is never going to be a mutualistic relationship of where we both exist for the pleasure of being together, apart, with a diversity of other organisms and cells. Not for the pleasure of only one species, for the well-being of one species. And the problems of gender are there from the beginning and continue within this system, even in resistance. So, for example, anarchist theoreticians who come to mind?
Dead white men.
Exactly. Yeah, name them. They're all white men. And they say great things. And I'm not saying don't listen to them because they're white men. A lot of them are dead. But, Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, Bakunin, they all said wonderful, important things. Kropotkin said, important things. But again, within a domesticated, civilized economy, cultural economy, and symbolic economy, it no longer matters that Kropotkin paid for his words by being imprisoned. What matters is that knowing Kropotkin, speaking about Kropotkin, gains you access to public space and to legitimacy that is still consuming those voices who are laboring to keep the economy, the predatory economy, running. So these points are scored in different ways, and this is where the symbolic economy is really important, because if we think of money as real, even though this is like maybe the first step towards symbolic economics, because money is like drawn pieces of paper, or originally was metal. In some societies, it could be banana leaves. The more banana leaves, or different, or gems or stones you collect, the more authority you have, and that authority. The issue is in symbolic economics is that authority is always convertible to energy privileges. How many favors you're going to get? Sexual favors, cleaning favors, building your house favors, cooking favors, growing your food, childcare. It's all convertible. And so, even within resistance movements, what always subverts us is that being part, not questioning how this hidden economics still structures our own relationships to the main culture, to the mainstream economics, and within ourselves, our own economy, ends up subverting us and recuperating the resistance. So, you know, Che Guevara is one of the most known recuperated symbols. He is now being a t-shirt, a cap, you know, postcards, you go to Cuba, you know, you participate in this whole tourist economy, and tourism is part of this consumption of the local, and it's always hierarchical, it's always predatory, because you never visit the local as a nomad, part of the landscape, of the moving chaos that always moves. You come without a memory of yourself, of your past, of that place. You consume and you leave, and with that economy, you reconfirm the symbolic culture, and you subvert even the resistance. Even the economy of resistance becomes part of it. We become part of it. And so, I want to leave some room for questions. Some people find a lot of it very abstract, and I want to really go into, you know, explications of, you know, the details. So I will leave on basically how to subvert really our symbolic predatory culture. We have to start questioning our anthropology. Anthropology is civilized, and anthropology tries to understand humanity, but it's a project of constructing humanity. A predatory humanity that is at the basis is never questioned. And this is what I want to launch for thought. How do we question our own predatory relationships to ourselves? How do we undo the promise of humanism, that humans and humanity is there for us, but we end up being the prey? And because we are the prey, we thoughtlessly consume other prey, because we justify our own consumption by perpetuating consumption. We forget life, and we reenact death and destruction. And we are now on the brink of collapse. It doesn't look like a happy event. So this is what I want to end on.
Predatory revolution of symbolic economics. Is it when human beings gain power over their environment and over animals through technique of creation of tools and weapons? And do you link that to education in that very sophistication of technique and of the sort of very closed access to that technique of knowledge?
Very good point. That moment of, you know, solidification is a response to the idea of human being as predator. So for me, I trace it a bit further back. So it seems, and in my last book, I go more into the technology of domination and predatory technologies. One of the first is language and symbolic thought. But it was, to me, it was a response to that, to the hunting. So, because you see, all animals use tools. All animals are capable of communicating, of creating language, and of creating technologies. And it's only these relationships become solidified only when there is an imposition of that cycle in almost an epidemic way. So you see, for example, cancer is lives on civilizational terms. Cancer cells do not know when to stop. A lot of bacteria or animals, different species, they do have access to developing like permanent technologies of predation. But bacteria know how to keep life in balance, that it never becomes a perpetual system that devours itself unless it becomes a cancer or an epidemic. Okay? So predatory economics becomes solidified within agricultural revolution because by that point it starts getting out of control, but not all over the world. And I always point out to a lot of civilizational projects that failed, and they did not fail because the collapse came from within. They failed because there was resistance from around, like Mesoamerican civilizations. They were resisted, and they collapsed because they could not draw and colonize other ways of life into this cancerous, hierarchical, predatory, really draining system, because civilization is always draining its base, and so it's always colonizing project because it needs to spread out. So civilization, based on agricultural system, developed those technologies, but the technologies were a response to that need. And this is what I want. I want us to start, thinking about is how our own ideas to predation and to what do we give to a diversity of life? How diverse are we? Having a castrated cat at home is not a diverse relationship. It's part of this consumption that the cat is allowed to exist because it gives us our emotional pleasure. Because we think we can fool ourselves with a symbolic culture that this is loving relationship, that this is mutual, that the cat has its own, exactly. And it's not. The cat is within very strict parameters of non-freedom and consumption. And you think of, and the cat has it much better off than, say, the chicken, or the cow, or the pig. So how our own solidification of these memes and of these narratives of predation play out in our own economics, in our own lives. Okay, and this is where it starts. Does that make any sense? Yeah. Yes.
I was just wondering, I was just trying to understand if you're looking at the predatory revolution as something inherently entwined with symbolic culture, like the development of symbolic culture as necessarily developing predatory.
So the predatory, let's say, decision, and again, I believe all species make certain cultural decisions. Subsistence, cultural subsistence, is a decision that a group makes to engage with each other and with the world around them. And what is the impact? So it's always about the impact of that decision. And evolution and adaptation happens within these ramifications and decisions. Like what is the impact? Is your community thriving? You're going to continue? There's chaos means there's constant change, there's constant back and forth, constant change of decisions, adaptations. And so the problem begins with when one group stops changing and adapting and going back and forth. That even if within a specific context, not all humanity, still, humans still exist who resist civilization, they resist carnivorous, predatory relationships, hunting even, right? But there used to be decisions that are made within this chaos and then kind of veered away back to sustainable relationships of diversity. So the symbolic culture comes in when this decision of a certain group of humans has developed a technology to make it a permanence. And it's this permanence of predatory relationships that then started reenacting itself, because technology is something that becomes part of us, it domesticates us, it makes us its own vehicle. It's kind of, because we are at the same time individuals, we are part of groups and part of our cultural decisions. In civilization, the cultural decisions are now run by institutions. Institutions kind of have their own will, if you it's nothing, like it's not a will that, okay, this comes, a dude called institution and has a stick and a hat and it's like, okay, my will is to dominate you and you're going to do what I like. Of course it's not. But it has a will to perpetuate a system that kind of we all reenact as little pieces of that mechanism. Even when we think we're individuals who want to resist, through symbolic culture and through symbolic economics, we end up actually reenacting, and this is where the schizophrenia comes. We end up reenacting it even in anarchist circles. How many, for example, in London a couple of years ago, on the West Coast in the US, rape situations within an anarchist community, the women did not go to the cops. They wanted to solve it on equal terms, but the guys who raped were important members, legitimate members of the anarchist community, and so the economy of the consensus worked in their favor, that even here, it's not about economics, money per se, but it has ramifications of that, whose voices were heard, and what is the engagement of the women who were victimized now by this whole collective that would not listen to them. How do you exchange emotions? How do you exchange your possibility for livelihood? How do you consume each other? It becomes clear that the gender is still, the conception of gender is still civilized, of what is pleasure, what is reproduction, etc., etc. And it's not a frequent, mostly it does not happen. But when it happens, it reveals that our economics are still, the race issue, the species issue, even within anarchist circles, is part of that symbolic economy where the consequences of social punishment for gender nonconformity, for racial, for animals, anarchist friend never had her dog on a leash. What are the ramifications of that within a system? Who is going to help when she gets society calls the cops on her because her dog is not on the leash and it's supposed to be. So we all fall into that dynamic. And symbolic culture is what made it so permanent. And so how do we undo that symbolic economy and symbolic culture? And what fueled it is the predatory culture. Makes sense? Or yes.
Okay, just so you're making, if I understand, there's usually hunter-gatherer and then coming into agriculture, but you seem to be separating hunter-gatherer, so it's gatherer and hunter, and saying hunter is kind of the beginning of the problem, or okay.
Yes, good summary. Okay, I didn't need to give a talk. Yeah, basically, yeah. So it's with the hunters, and the hunters that then developed, because even with hunting groups, not all of them stayed hunters. And actually, like the primates, the few primates actually, most primates are still frugivores. And you know, you look at children are still frugivores when they're born. They are domesticated by this whole apparatus, medical, educational. It's like the whole institution of civilization tells us and freaks us out that, you know, the kids need protein, they need to grow, they need to eat meat, and blah 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 blah. You see that, you know, we still have that ability to rewild, and to rewild is to form different relationships with diversity, with our food, with what we consume. And so with hunting groups, when they started doing that, a lot of them would do it very rarely. The majority of the time they relied on gathering. And it's only with those groups that started solidifying those systems of predation. And with that came actually the first separation of gender. Because when you look at, again, the economics, the energy economics that goes into hunting, it is actually not sustainable. There is a lot of energy and preparation goes into stalking the prey, going, you know, developing the tools. That is all time taken from someone who had to supply you with that energy. That energy in terms of food, in terms of tools, in terms of time. It's all part of that very fragile economics of diversity. And the minute you start extracting and then not going back to give back, but you solidify and go further and extract more, gender becomes an important element of division of labor. And division of labor, the concept itself of labor, is civilized. Because in wilderness, you do not labor. You play, you gather, you enjoy, you love. You relate to a world that is so full of surprises and communication. And then you install symbolic culture and language, and you stop understanding what is going on. You no longer know yourself and your place in the world. And then this whole economic system gets disrupted with that decision to be a predator.
Yeah, I guess I'm curious as to whether you think that it's possible to respond to this culture, to this sort of entrenching of predation, by creating another symbolic culture that presents a different relationship, or whether it's symbolic culture of any sort that is the problem, that entrenches, that prevents us from evolving.
Exactly, that's what I think. Because the minute you have a symbol, you no longer relate through feelings, empathy, compassion. Empathy is another problematic word that is co-opted by civilization, by sciences. Like, you know, for example, a lot of recent experiments in psychology, social psychology. Okay, the rich don't have empathy, and the poor have empathy. And how we tested it, we took people in controlled, closed environment, because science is about reinforcing control and closed environment to alienate, different possible factors, and identify, and it's all part of that domestication, separation, alienation, and lies. So what happens is they put these people and they show them pictures with expressions, and so the poor people, the lower class people could identify the expressions more correctly, and the richer people, wealthier people could not. And so basically the conclusion was that the poor have empathy, but the test itself was not a test on empathy. it was on symbolic understanding because it was pictures. Like it's the contrary of empathy. Empathy is when you feel and you have to be present. You cannot look at a picture and understand what is going on. Picture is there to separate us from the real and to tell us, oh, this is what the test was actually about, is civilized competence. So the poor have to know certain expressions, and expressions are cultural. You know, Germans, British, Russians, French, Zulu, Arabic speakers, they have different muscle development because, you know, they have different culturally developed expressions, the way, you know, they hold the mouth, you know, the sounds. So how are you, you know, how are you going to test any of that through pictures? What it shows is that the poor have to be within this economy fluent because this is how they're not going to be completely predated upon, but can also have a niche beneath them to predate. This is all that it tells us. And the rich don't have to because they have a whole apparatus that works to give them all the economic points that they need. And so, so empathy is one of those ways. And being present is the only way to know, you know, what goes on. So the knowledge that we develop in the wilderness is going to be completely opposite and different and diverse, unpredictable, than from this very controlled knowledge that is produced by the institutions. Even, and I'm not saying like, you know, all the psychologists, all the anthropologists are, you know, colonial bastards. Some of them are. But a lot of them are, you know, trying to subvert, just like we are. But we get lost in that symbolic language and culture and economy. Yes?
I'm wondering what is your view on domination outside of the human interaction, like the domination between animals, like in guerrilla group where you have really male domination and empathy and stuff like that. What is your lecture on that? If it's not in a human symbolic culture, there is still, do you think that there still can be domination between the individual?
No, because they don't have technologies of domination. And so that does not mean that there are no, for lack of a better word, predators out there. But humans developed a myth that humans are originally predators, but or not, even if not original, because now, you know, we have all the evidence to show us, and evidence scientific, but also actually even for religious people, you know, even biblical. In the Old Testament, the humans are created on the same day as the animals. They were ordered not to compete and to eat seeds, because as primates we eat berries and, you know, and we help reproduce and spread the seeds, right? So our role within the animal kingdom is part of the majority of the animal relationships with animal economics, which is mutualistic, commensalistic, and at maximum amensalistic, which is commensalistic is when one group can benefit from another group, but without any effect on the other group. Mutualistic is usually it's mutual. Everyone benefits in some way. Doesn't have to be in exactly equal. You know, like, you know, I give you a piece of paper and you have to give me back a piece of paper. It doesn't have to be that, but it's mutualistic. You know, I give you a piggyback ride to the store, and then, you know, one day your neighbor, you know, comes and helps me gather some berries. Okay, so that's like the berries will be grateful because, you know, we help spread the seed. You know, so it's like already interspecies mutualistic relationships, and within animals that choose to have predatory relationships, they are never fully predatory, and there are much less predators in the wild than there are frugivores and mutualistic, or herbivores are the ones who eat grass, frugivores who eat fruit, and also among the primates. It's not a technology of domination that primates have. It's a response to situations. A lot of these responses are actually driven by humans. In Africa, when Jane Goodall was studying the chimps, and for the longest time, she never saw hunting or killing. But if you understand the context of colonialism of Africa, and you see when the colonizing powers were kicked out, how the new colonies inscribed themselves within the world economics of neocolonialism. I mean, there's still the same predatory economics, but now it depended on them desertifying their own land. Before it was the colonizer who was doing it. Now they were doing it to extract. There's an excellent documentary film, I don't know if people have seen it, Darwin's Nightmare. Highly recommended. So about these economics of neocolonialism and the desertification effect on the environment. And so the chimps start having problems of space, and they respond in a human way. So this is why I'm saying that the technologies are available to develop the system of alienation and domination. That capacity is available to other species as well. But most know that they should not go that way. And only, I wouldn't say only one primate chose it, and sometimes a few other species choose it to the detriment of their environment. So in animals, they don't have that technology. They never go that way. The system of life always responds as a system of immunity to stop that domination, the development, even the possibility of developing a system of domination. It's always curtailed, and balance is reinstalled. Yeah? And then there's, go ahead.
So do you think then perhaps that predation and the instillment of property and agriculture and all these things, it's kind of a response to a realization of competition, and with animals the idea of competition is, when their landscape is encroached upon, they're interacting with each other more and realizing there's competition, and therefore they become predatory in response to competition. And with humanity, it perhaps has to do with, especially even in colonial situations, this idea of globalization creating more competition, because people who never realized, all that was out there now are seeing all that is out there, and that creates a fear and a sense of competition, and because of that competition, property becomes more private, and sort of an idea of stockpiling because of inevitability of this encroaching competition.
Okay, so the idea of competition is part of this self-legitimating narrative of civilization. Because again, when you look at the majority of species, what governs them is mutualism and mutualistic relationships that are not based on competition. So the competition is, when you focus on competition, and maybe there are elements, obviously there are elements of, predatory relationships, or, certain ways of expressing competition in either in terms of so-called resources or reproduction. But the problem is that this is such an insignificant part of the larger picture of mutualism, empathy, and cooperation that when you focus only on that, in order to legitimate a narrative that will force you to reenact this mechanism of domination because you are fearing competition, it becomes a reality within a structure of that economy. Okay? So economic of competition is what we have now. And economics of competition in predatory cultures that are dominated by predation, because again, predators such as wolves are never fully predators. They sleep so long. They eat a lot of like berries and watermelons in Crimea. We visited a couple of years ago, and you know, the biggest problem for watermelon farmers were the wolves, because they would come and just like, you know, and munch them. Yeah. And so that's the period when, you know, the hares would reproduce most because the wolves are having a party in the field. And so what governs those relationships is mutualism. What governs even the relationship between the wolves and the hares is mutualism, because it's so rarely compared to the lifespan and the life capacity of the hares that the wolves would predate on them. It's not the fate of every hare to be eaten by a wolf. It's the weaker ones. Every now and then, in rotation of other ways of living and cooperating and extracting energy and giving back energy, that reigns. And only when you focus on it as a permanence that you highlight and you reenact, because somehow you got into your head that you're a wolf. But if you're a wolf, how do we explain all the murders we commit upon each other, or the rapes, or, you know, enslavement? Wolves don't do that to each other. That's not the life of predators and prey in the wilderness. They still exist for each other's purpose, and they meet and they leave, and they meet and they leave. But we are stuck in this claustrophobic system of alienation, self-aggrandizement, and self-hate at the same time. And this is what fuels our economics, is this narrative, this myth that we are the predator. And we are not. Someone else, if you keep having it.
Well, I don't, maybe it's too broad, but since you say that the problem is the symbolic culture within itself, ontologically per se, then what does that mean for art and artistic expression? Are, like Nietzsche said, the artists are the most corrupted and can't do anything about them? Or is there a way to use art and artistic expression in a way that is fighting this?
Yeah, it's a very difficult question. It's very difficult because obviously, like myself here, you know, I'm participating in my language, and I critique in this, like a third of the book is critique of language as a technology of, you know, of oppression and subversion of revolution. And yet here I'm, you know, speaking with you in English, which is like the new neo-colonial language.
Does language fall in symbolism?
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's different from communication, because communication is, again, it's a holistic experience of mutualism, where, you know, I transmit meaning and you accept my meaning, you transmit your meaning, and it's communication. Language, we try to use it as communication. We're told that but it's the first problem that ingrains in us these memes of predation.
Is
and
language
alienation.
part of the problem, or can we
Yeah,
change
yeah.
language? Or is language impossible for us to take that direction?
Well, my response to her was that symbolic culture is the problem, and language is symbolic technology, so it is a problem. we try, and art is obviously, art maybe less a bit than language, in the sense that, again, if we take Lévi-Strauss' observation, that, again, it kind of reveals certain tensions that are unresolved. But then at the same time, it kind of reinscribes, because we let the steam out. The suffering artist is out there, cut his ear, went mad, and then it's part of this symbolic culture. Like, was that what Van Gogh really wanted? Like, he died poor, he died crazy. He wasn't crazy, according to me, because he resisted, he rebelled. But he is recuperated as someone who is designated by this culture as sick in that moment, because he's not participating in this economy. And then he becomes part of that currency in that economy. So who can afford Van Gogh now, ironically, right? And so...
he's been hijacked as a symbol.
Exactly, and so this is then what we participate in. I mean, I think about my own work, and I produce it, with love and suffering, and it's out there, to bring love to the world. And I have no idea, it's words, it's books, it's part of this publishing system. How do we, maybe it invites us to have a dialogue and to think, how are we going to rewild ourselves and rewild our own relationships, that maybe in the end we won't need this, because art is also born of suffering. Because if you just want to just go and draw funky things, well, they will probably sell better, but the real statement of the artist is suffering. And what is the meaning of it when it's recuperated?
Yeah, but it's always recuperated. But my question is more than, do we have to just abandon art because art cannot help us fight the symbolic culture, or is always creating new symbolism and new aesthetics, as it is seen through art history, even though it's recuperated afterwards, it does something, to create a new symbol and to create new aesthetics that break from the institutional symbolism.
So this is then, part of my description was, okay, how do revolutions happen? What are revolutions, and how do they get sabotaged? So what is change, meaningful change and revolution? Has there been a single successful revolution since what I now identify, the predatory revolution, then agricultural revolution, because that really changed the dynamics. It kind of solidified everything. Then there was the industrial revolution. To me, these are the only revolutions that really happened ever since this decision for this subsistence economics was taken by a group of humans. So then maybe if we really want a meaningful revolution, a meaningful change, maybe we should go and rethink about how we thought, how we were taught to think about change and revolution. Did art ever achieve, did social movements ever achieve real meaningful change? What happened with the revolutions in the Middle East recently? Can we even call them revolutions? The French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, the Chinese Revolution, new colonialisms, they were all revolutions, and we get reinscribed through symbolic culture. The problem is not current art per se, but because art per se maybe invites us to think, but thinking and expressing and leaving a symbolic piece out there, an orphan, will ultimately be reintegrated into the economics, civilized economics, and will not change. So how do we then move beyond that? We express, we write a book, we write, make a painting, theater is another way, of inviting, but it becomes an exercise of narcissism, because then, I like to give this example of a wealthy friend who loves to go and watch African festival movies and takes, the napkins and cries and cries and cries, and then goes back to his life as if nothing ever happened. Because that was the purging, the catharsis, and feels so good, like I'm so empathetic. Like that's the recuperation of the word, empathy. Well, I saw a film and I cried, and wept, and I saw him cry, like really honestly and sincerely for that moment. How does it change the economics, the social and symbolic relationship, even with me? And not to mention the rest of the world, the rest of diversity of humanity and other species that are never included in the concept of revolution. So this is, to think about our predatory economics is to think about our relationship to diversity beyond our species. What do we give back to diversity? And civilization is a monoculture that simplifies, domesticates, makes us forget our past.
Then how do we get out of it? Is that a good question enough for you?
It's a great question.
Because I've been wondering since the past 45 minutes or so, then how do we get out of it? Do we stop speaking? Do we have to stop interacting with each other with our mouths? Because that's what we know. I'm probably not going to stop speaking anytime soon. But I really, really want to know, how do we get out of it? The symbolic culture, predatory, whatever. How do we get out of it? How can I do something to get out of this?
It's a very good question, because we all, that's why, the people who came here, that's why they came here, because we're all constantly thinking, how do we get out of this? And
because there's no clear answer. Anyway, I have to follow a path, and that's the thing I don't want to do. Even in anarchist groups, you have to follow a path. There is hierarchy.
Exactly, that's what I was talking about.
There is some kind of order, which is not what I want.
Exactly.
That's what I really want to know, and I have no answers to this.
So maybe what would have, nobody has answers, and we're here exploring, and we all want out, and we're all exploring a way out. And what I'm giving is tips to understand where we get sabotaged and where we get recuperated and where we go wrong. So to identify this, I'm not saying go on a vow of silence, although I do know a person who actually went on a vow of silence and heard the voice of God and quit what he was doing and went and lived with children of war in Africa and took care of them and started self-sufficient farms and trying to trace their families, and so sometimes it works for some people, but it's not because I told him. Actually, I met him post silence period, which was very inspiring. It's one of the ways, one of the decisions. What I'm giving is hints and clues to where we get sabotaged, and it's a very good point, because one of the ways in which even revolutionary movements get their schism is between, the radical revolutionaries who want change in society, so it's like social mobilization, movement, and change, and then the focus there on the movement, and because of the symbolic economy, they fail, and we all are corrupt by the system and by the culture and by the language, so we all fail to see how we participate even within the group, even within our resistance, within our understanding in this economics, personally. And then there's the other group, which is less revolutionary, but they feel they are. It's like the new age people who are personal life choices, and do I take green showers or red showers, and do I take, eat organic food and go to a co-op, and It's like, if I live well for myself, then, you know, this is what matters. And the problem is, both are wrong and both are right.
Okay.
And the institutions work precisely because we don't relate how our personal choices, our personal reenactment of predatory economics within the niche of being a prey and being a predator. Because this is what this system, humanistic system, offers us. It offers us the myth that you're the predator, and so when you feel oppressed by the rich humans, you isolate yourself from the animals or from the other humans that are far away and you don't see, because you know them through pictures, you know them through a narrative, through words that have very specific cultural context, meaning that reinforce this economics. And so, for you to relate as a person to this system, understanding how the institutions work through you, and attacking the institutions at the same time. You cannot choose one or the other. It's like we're doomed to bicker and fail. But if you understand how they are related and how the institutions work through us, through what we learn in school, through what we refuse to learn through life, through what when we identify our suffering and rebel against a system, but we very often misdirect our rebellion and don't understand actually what are we rebelling against. And, you know, and so it's understanding that and joining all of these levels of resistance. So it's a different kind of, I would say, wild resistance. Wild resistance because we're all different, we all identify different targets, and we have different abilities. How do we join each other within that diversity? And renouncing, like Kropotkin did, renouncing our privileges, the little privileges that we have in our own predatory relationships, in order to really effectuate significant change that is not going to be just like micro, because, you know, a group of anarchists, famous song, you know, was it Spanish or Italian, Les Anarchistes, and il y a un soupçon, like there's 1 in 100 during the Spanish Revolution. The song is about that. It was Spanish version, and so it's like there's only 1 in 100. Even during the Spanish Revolution, 1 in 100 is an anarchist. So you effectuate that small change, it's not going to bring change and challenge to an economics that is encroaching and encompassing.
Yeah, because what I was understanding is that if I want to fight this symbolic culture, I have to get naked in the wood and not speak to anyone.
That would be personal.
Live out of babies and stuff like that. But now that we've cleared out that thing, I think I get the
you
point.
shouldn't give
Because
up.
I'm totally not gonna get naked in the woods.
You shouldn't give up.
I don't
on
think
that.
anyone will get naked in the woods and just live off of that. I mean, it's.
Why not?
Why not?
I don't think I have the physical protection to live through winter naked in the woods here in Quebec. Right, I just want to say this. I'm pretty sure I'm not going to survive. But
Yes.
Perhaps just simple things like
Yes.
relearning to feed yourselves slowly and trying to maybe regain some kind of independence. Food is an important one for me. Most of us are at the mercy of our money. You know, so none of us can feed ourselves without money. If our money's worthless tomorrow, then you realize how powerful the system is, and it doesn't mean that you have to get naked and give up everything, but you can strive towards that direction, perhaps. Right?
Exactly.
yeah, because one day it's going to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, it's probably going to happen anytime soon, and we're probably going to be all freaking
Okay,
naked in the woods.
Yeah, but you have to first of all acknowledge that there are indigenous populations that are resisting and that have not become victims of technological culture.
Yes.
That are naked in the woods, in Africa, in America, in the Americas, and all over the world. Okay, so acknowledging that, because I understand it's a fear that civilization has ingrained in us that, okay, if you suddenly become naked in the woods, you will die, okay? It's the same like parents have kids and the doctors instill in them the fear that if you don't give meat to your kids, if you don't raise them as predators,
Yeah, but they did not.
they will die,
They did
okay?
not. They did not lose their natural instinct as we did. We lost our instinct. I mean, get a tiny human baby and put him in the woods, and he's going to die. He's not going to survive.
No.
So,
Actually, there's a lot of studies on feral children who have survived in the woods
Really?
with animals. Make a research on feral children,
okay.
and they have survived. There are rewilding happens, but the issue, okay, I don't want it to be an issue of you personally just quitting everything and going to the woods, okay? But it should not be an issue of you personally not doing that either,
Okay.
okay? Because technologically, yes, we have been we have been made dependent on artificial clothes, on artificial food, on vaccinations, and it's all part of a system of predation that is keeping us dependent and thinking that we cannot break through. There is a different problem why we cannot break through, a more serious problem is the population. The problem is that with agricultural revolution, the need for work resources, human resources, and reproduction of all domesticated human and non-human animals has made it that today, after 10,000 years of agricultural civilization, there's too many people, and I would not encourage all of you going to the woods, because that will reestablish a hierarchy of who can afford to go to the woods. I have good friends who I love and I trust and I respect, who have gone to the woods to live, but it's a racial, gendered hierarchy that allows them, in their specific gender and skin color, to have access to that freedom, to that land, to those spaces, that does not allow other humans.
Yeah.
Okay? And their relationship to the land is still predatory because they are drawing on hunter-gatherers with an underlining highlighting of hunter culture. Okay? And that is a problem that maybe is less oppressive to the rest of humanity, but it's still part of that oppressive cultural economics. So the reason why I would not encourage you personally to do that is because of this. So we need to solve the problems of the demand for labor resources, for energy extractions, the understanding that so far cities, paradoxically, are maybe more ecological concentrations of humans, but at the same time, cities do depend on extraction of resources from everywhere else. So they're like parasitic centers of cancerous growth or tumor that consume the rest of the world. These are the problems we need to tackle. The population problem is not about exterminating like the countries that are reproducing the fastest, because they are responding to labor demand. The problem is to stop that labor demand and to install viable practices, sexual practices, reproduction practices that are not patriarchal and not human resource based. Okay? So, and symbolic economy and symbolic culture are part of that mechanism that leads to these. So how, the question is very good, because how do we end where we are no longer dependent on a technological parasitic system?
I don't know.
We don't know, but this is where each of us, brainstorm.
It's either we lose our technology or
Can I say something?
Oh, you.
I don't know, like there's a lot of women who raise their hands.
Yeah,
and
okay.
we're having
Sorry.
so much space.
Yes.
I'd just like to address what you were saying, is that I think it's unrealistic to ask someone to give us a solution. Okay, there are many solutions and there are many things that are being done towards rewilding. People individually, people in small groups all over the world, and I'm sure that you in your life will also think of other solutions that you will be able to contribute to all these groups and this collective effort that is happening. But I think also another thing is not to fall into this trap of fatalism and this trap of pessimism that everything is dark and we're all going to die and it's going to be bad. I think we have to take small steps as they are, and collectively our small steps will change the winds.
Yes.
And yeah, following what you're saying, I think that we should also get out of that logic that that predatory logic, as you said, that I need something. If you say okay, well, I need sex, I'm not going to stop, even if women don't consent, I'm not going to stop having sex because I need sex. Even if animals suffer, well, I need proteins, I'm not going to stop eating animals, I need proteins. Well, I need clothes, I'm going to stop wearing clothes. And it's the same logic that we're using right now while we're saying, well, I need words, I'm not going to stop talking. And it's the same logic that you use for every of those things. It's not like that. It's just stop thinking that I need that. You just really, in a really great way, you show us example that's people that stop talking. And it was benefit for them. And we're not saying that tomorrow morning everybody are going to stop talking. There's going to be no rape, no animal, no violence against animal, no violence against nature. Nobody's here is stupid enough to think that we're going to have a magical solution that's going to solve everything. And it's that society also that brings us that logic that we need a magical solution, something that just happens quickly and something that happens in a take a pill and all your problems will be solved. That's the same system that oppresses us, that makes us think that we need those kinds of solutions. It's just stop, we have to change the way we're thinking about solutions. It's you said it in a really great way, so I just want to follow that. I think, well, if I understand well what you said, of course, but
both points are excellent.
I think that logic is based on it. We have to change the way we think about solutions also.
Exactly. Yeah. Very important points. Yeah.
I was going to say, how do you reconcile this with anarchist theory?
Pardon?
How do you reconcile this with anarchist theory in general? Like you mentioned Kropotkin, you mentioned
How I tie all of this with anarchist theory?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or do you? I don't know.
Well, okay. So, okay, there's wildness and there's anarchism. And anarchism exists as a system of thought, of resistance to oppression, governmentality, and oppression, hierarchical oppression, right? So anarchism is important within civilized or, governing entities. I talk about both, wildness as well. Wildness is the basis of life. That's where life was formed. It came out in spite of everything, as a miracle. So intelligent, so full of potential. And it has existed without any need of governance. And it still exists. So when I talk about wild economics, it encompasses the possibilities that anarchist theory or anarchists dream about and aspire to through their actions of resistance. So the goal is wildness. And anarchism is one of the ways through which we can get there.
But is an anarchist, sorry,
I
conversation.
was
Go
just
ahead,
gonna say, eventually you
Yeah.
learn the black flags too.
And embrace the black knife and chaos.
kind of respond that there's been like, well, this is kind of specifically anti-civilization current, but there's been a green anarchist current and an anti-civilization current going back at least to the turn of the century. There were groups in France that had specifically anti-civilization outlooks, but a lot of anarchism was based, just like Marxism, in a progress, industrial-oriented outlook, except that you had people like Routledge and who were more ecologically oriented. So you have that basis, but going to a more specifically anti-civilization type of outlook, that's kind of more recent in the sense of it goes back several decades, say going back to Jean Zerzan and Fifth Estate, which has changed a lot, but back in the 1970s, early 80s, when Zerzan was publishing articles, when other people were publishing articles and trying to define the idea that just being anti-capitalist and being anti-statist wasn't enough, that there's more problems, we're trying to find domination, that there is domination in this techno-industrial system that's grown up, and people started looking back and trying to analyze it. Now some people, like Zerzan, who was publishing articles that were published in the Elements of Refusal, that's been republished in the late 70s, early 80s, where he was talking about agriculture, articles about language. That was going further, and that's kind of the problem, I think, in a sense of what's happening here, in a sense that questioning things that had not been questioned by the traditional anarchists. They were not questioning language, and this is kind of even part of the debate, in a sense, about what is anti-civ, and to what extent, like you've talked kind of little about the techno-industrial system kind of in passing, but you concentrated more on symbolic type of stuff and attacking it from that viewpoint, whereas other people want to, like Jacques Ellul and other sources, have put much more emphasis on the techno-industrial system as being an autonomous system, where Marx trying to put it as capital. That's the thing. He was saying, wait a minute, there's an industrial system which has its own criteria that's putting forth. So maybe these are debates up to a certain point, and like that when you
yeah, no, very good points, because a lot of the contribution of critiques is very important, but it's true that they focus on specific, say, elements, and I would say actually symptoms of the problem. Okay, so feminists, Marxist feminists, Marxists, anarchists, and all the different, so-called leftists, the socialist anarchists, anarcho-primitivists, and etc., etc. They all identify a certain mechanism that brings in an understanding of the problem, but a lot of them are still ingrained, like the foundational premises still stem from our civilized understanding of what the problem is without seeing the real problem. So in my work, I work with the underlying premises. What is in the terms? What is in the term revolution when we talk about revolution? Are we satisfied with what happened in Russia in 1917? Are we satisfied with the Arab Spring? Does it, and where does it fail? What is a revolution if we start talking about technological and industrial revolution? So Jacques Ellul, identifies, John Zerzan identifies, some of the problems with technology, but Zerzan starts going much more, further back to seeing at what point did we wander astray, okay? But what I want to bring to the table is the understanding that if we accept the civilized language and its meaning that is given to us within closed walls, closed from the world, from the rest of even us, we're separated and isolated even from other human beings, leave alone our understanding of wilderness, of animals, of plants, of how we interact with them. If we don't understand the basis of that relationship, the ontological basis of existence, why do we understand we exist? Why do we understand the skies and the stars exist? Does Mars exist in order for us to screw it up here and fuck off? Is that what the Philip K. Dick offers excellent critique, but look at the movies. They recuperate that dream that, people are offered a critique that came in total suffering, total madness. Madness as separation from this reality, the oppression that Philip K. Dick was writing in. Poverty. And it's now, people are proud, we're going to Mars. Like total recall. So my issue is how to understand the basic point of departure. And that gives us the direction. And the direction is the forest in the end. After we solve the
I knew it was.
problems. So, yes.
I guess when you're talking about the failures of revolution, I think you're still using the same model of success. That is the model that you're actually critiquing. Because the whole reason that we have this meaning or the knowledge is being shared is because some of that knowledge of what happened in certain places got passed to different generations. I mean, the whole idea of what was successful and wasn't is what we've read in the history books.
Well, I don't know what you understand by my understanding of success.
But you were saying that they weren't successful.
Yeah, what's success for you?
Oh, you said that they weren't successful, right?
Okay, so
I'm saying the whole fact that we have an understanding that something happened there.
But it seems you don't understand my understanding of the word of success.
You didn't define it.
Success, I did, this whole talk is about rewilding. So for me, successful, a revolution that really changes oppressive and predatory economics. So far, none of the revolutions were successful because the predatory system is in place. It's only the bodies that reshuffled. Okay, so if the French Revolution, had a few heads roll and then, rearranged a system, but maybe a part of the infrastructure that, before was based on feudalistic, countryside kind of dominance into a more technological and industrial nation state. So it just changed the bodies, but it didn't really change anything in the paradigm of extraction of energy. So to me, that was not successful. The predatory relationships of oppression, desertification, what we're witnessing today is due to the failure of that revolution. So if a revolution is going to be successful, what is a revolution for? From what I understand, most people gathering here and anarchists want a world free of domination, mutualistic relationships, exchange, mutual respect, understanding, and respect of diversity, right? So nobody owns you for what you could do to me. That is the basis of civilized relationships of domestication and dominance. And so if we really want to disrupt this economy and this predatory system, the answer is wildness. And wildness, I define it as these relationships of exchange, of energy, of mutuality. Wilderness is the space that we will give back to such relationships, where none of the species control anything else, but through chaos, we start to relearn how to tune into each other, how to live with each other through give and take. This is the success I'm talking about.
I don't think that a revolution is necessarily for absolute, complete change towards one direction, because I see that as being also domination and direction, and usually that's a certain party of people that can take power. So I see it more as a critique of the actual environment and a situation where many people are coming together to benefit and make better their lives as a progression towards something better, which each individual place has a history and a relationship to their environment, and maybe asks for different degrees of that. So I don't want to be the person that's gonna, I don't think anybody should be the person that judges what it is to become rewilded. I'm not saying that those revolutions are going towards that.
So basically,
it's obsolete. Just one second.
Yeah, you're here, like your understanding of revolution, you want a revolution, and there are a lot of people, from what I understand, want the revolution because I don't want to be oppressed. So that's like the only thing that matters to them.
No.
I don't want to have government, and I want to live as, like me and my buddies want to live, and don't tell me what to do. And so it's still based on this predatory system, because for
it's still based on the predators. I'm saying it's not something that just, it doesn't snap out.
Wildness is you caring for what goes on around you, caring for how you give back to what you extract. Okay, and if in a predatory system, you don't care. You just care about keeping your place and extracting and not being too screwed over. So that's the difference.
I don't.
Okay, so yeah.
Another question.
Who had the question? You had the question? Oh, you.
No, I was just saying maybe we'll take another question.
Oh.
Well, I heard you. Sorry, I heard somebody else. I just heard you. I think I read something about you talking about how children are. Well, that's the title of your book.
Yes.
Wild children, domesticated. About how the children, at a very young age, they're brought into this system of symbolism. I don't know if you wanna, like, elaborate how, at a very young age, we bring this on our children.
Yeah.
And what effect this has on.
Well, absolutely, and this is, again, it's the good point of how far back do we identify the problem? Is it primary school? Is it kindergarten? Again, I go back. Okay, I was thinking, well, is it birth? But the moment of birth is already contextualized within a predatory system of the fact that your children are part of the human resources that you are going to produce. And being part of that system of thinking in predatory ways that, okay, as parents, it's an investment, that's what we think of, but this whole social apparatus that oversees the reproduction of human resources for job, and nobody like hides it, like that's the term, human resources. We have,
human farming.
Human farming, but in corporations, you have whole departments, educational institutions. You go to human resources if you have problems, right? Like the whole concept is so ingrained in us. We don't question how does that impact your conception of the child. That child is already domesticated within that system. Okay, and what does it mean to rewild our parenting and the child that is going to be still part of this world? How is that child going to learn what is the real life around and what is the meaning, and how are you going to have a meaningful, happy existence? And it's within this system, it's very difficult. So, then again, that identifies the, one of the ways in which the system sabotages us already before we're even conceived as an idea. Okay, and how do we go from there to the forest? One last question, and then yes.
Just to add to what you were saying, I wanted to add that we are even programmed to labor, to give birth. So how we have to start from there to continue.
Yes.
I mean, we see it as an act of a medicated act. But there's nothing more natural than labor itself.
Yeah.
So why won't we start from there?
Excellent point. And actually, excellent, because I also talk about it that, labor itself is work, and that's part of the profession. Like the whole division of genders starts with who is going to labor in the fields, labor at home, labor in the reproduction of human resources, who will later labor on. And we're already domesticated with that. How do we break out? How do we break out of this whole concept of labor? Why do we need to labor? It should be a joy. Yeah, so, and I know you know that it's a joy. It is a joy. So, thank you.
Нашу силу лис, медведь и даже мышь. От души, коль всякий пляшет, зашумит в пруду камыш. Залихватски пой и руками ты маши. От энергии такой зашумели камыши. И в могучий пляс с вами вместе я пущусь. С нами драм и светлая Русь. Вырубай его нахрен.